Khadija. I'm a media enthusiast and also a student of media studies at International School Lahore. Today, we're going to critically reflect on my AS level media studies magazine, which is about illiteracy in Pakistan. This video is going to be divided into 4 to 5 parts regarding the questions within the critical reflection given by the examiner. So I hope you and I can explore my AS magazine together, and let's embark on this journey together. Let's move on to my first question, which is how does your product challenge media conventions and which social group does it represent? So my magazine is a journalistic magazine whereby it kind of maintains realism. It's a journalistic magazine, which means essentially it would have facts, it would have statistics, it kind of maintains the realism of the world and realism of the story while trying to maintain journalistic integrity, and that is something I aim to do with this magazine. So in terms of inspiration, we took inspiration from National Geographic and their time within the early 2000s and the late 2000s, around like 2015, where they were giving out magazines that kind of had one focus image and then a content story regarding a niche topic within a country. So that is kind of like the inspiration behind my magazine and what my magazine is. So, in terms of the topic of my magazine and the social group that I'm representing, currently we're talking about illiteracy within Pakistan. I believe it's an incredibly relevant an incredibly imperative social issue to talk about, because in the status quo, more than 40% of Pakistan's population is unable to read and write. And that is an incredibly big statistic. So when I talk about illiteracy in Pakistan, I talk about the kids who once had the desire to go to school or once attended the school and could not go. They had to drop out due to several reasons like poverty, child labor, social constructs, gender roles, all of these incredibly big problems contributing to the overall illiteracy within Pakistan. Then at the end of the day, I believe that this is the story of the masses. It's story of more than 19 million people, and I want to represent that through a niche of kids who once went to school and now cannot go to school and had to drop out. In regards to the concept and intention behind my magazine, so my magazine can be summed up in a very simple sentence, which essentially means that I want to represent the story of masses, almost more than 19 million people, and represent it through a particular niche. And to understand that kind of niche and the target audience that I'm coming from and the models that I'm using, we need to know a very important story that's very close to my heart. So for the past 3 years, I've been engaging within community service, specifically specializing within education and within illiteracy within Pakistan. And on this journey, I have met incredible people, and foremost, I have met incredible kids with such great potential. But the irony of the situation is that these kids had to drop out of school due to poverty and due to the reasons that I told earlier. So in order to make these magazines, I went back to the school, I went back to all of these community service activities, specializing within education and meeting my friends and meeting those kids again. It was the irony of the situation that these kids had to drop out of school, which means that while going back to these schools, while going back into community service, I wanted to document their irony, I wanted to document their tragedy and their story. So now let's finally dive into the layout and the inspiration and the cover photo behind these magazines that are the main stars of the show. So let's dive into the cover photo. The cover photo seems fairly simplistic at first, but there's a lot of symbolism intended behind it. So the cover photo is essentially the photo of a child where I have placed emphasis on his eyes, and there is the flag of Pakistan painted on his face. He's wearing a uniform. And that is essentially what the cover photo is. So what is the symbolism behind that cover photo? So the first and foremost thing that I want to discuss is the face painting that we have incorporated within the cover photo. So when I was thinking about something that truly represents adolescence, I thought about face painting. Why is that so? I thought about face painting because I remember when I was a kid, or when I've seen like kids around me, when we would go to the carnival, we would always get our face painted, which kind of symbolizes youth and adolescence and what childhood is all supposed to be about. It's supposed to be about engaging within your community, going to school, having fun, and that was just a reference and symbolism to childhood. Then in terms of the painting itself, what did I paint on his face? So we tried multiple variations on multiple like kids. We tried to paint animals, we try to paint different sort of like things that symbolize youth. But at the end of the day, I did want some sort of cultural context within this cover image. So we painted the flag of Pakistan on the subject's face in order to illustrate the context and the place where the story is taking place, right? Essentially, we wanted to show that this story is taking place within Pakistan, and that is something that we wanted to highlight right in the get-go of the magazine. So that is something that we highlighted within the cover page. While that was the cover page, we've also included some codes and conventions. So when I'm talking about codes and conventions, I do want to add that we've given the child or given the subject a school uniform and the winter school uniform to symbolize that, this child is a student, right? Essentially, that is the meaning of going to school, the illiteracy. We wanted to symbolize that through giving the child a uniform, and that is mostly the props that we've used. We have not highlighted some sort of background location because we wanted the child and that specific idea to kind of speak for itself. So in conclusion, conclusively, that is the cover photo. Alongside that, we've added text about the illiteracy paradox. That is something that we're further going to discuss within the magazine itself, within the layout. So let's move on to that. When I'm talking about the overall graphical layout of the magazine, I've kept it very minimalistic and very, very modern for a couple of reasons. The first reason is I want my audience to relate with it. So if you notice the current status quo, most magazines are now going towards a more minimalistic layout where they're kind of having like very minimal typography and they want the content to shine. And for the second reason is that while we know historically magazines used to use a lot of graphical elements, it is something that is hard to consume now and hard to print. And the third and the most important reason why I've kept it minimalistic in terms of layout is a very simple intention. I want the stories to speak for themselves. I want the visuals to speak for themselves. I want the intention behind the magazine to speak for itself. And that essentially means that whatever story that I'm trying to tell throughout the layout and with the photos is something that I want to emphasize. As we talk about the idea of the content shining for itself, then in regards to the graphical content or in graphical elements, I essentially mean that I wanted to highlight the photos and the subjects of the photos and the overall context of the entire magazine, the overall content of that entire magazine by adding like very minimalistic typography. So when the reader essentially opens the magazine, he's hit with impactful images and also hit with impactful and concise content. In terms of the content that we've added within this magazine, the content is related to a very important topic called the Katora mindset, which essentially means that a lot of the times there's a narrative within the current status of Pakistan where a lot of the times adults are forcing kids, like adult parents simply cannot afford school, so they force kids to beg on streets. So as soon as you open the first feature page, you are hit with an image of a child behind like bars, behind a cage, and his hand is emphasized within the image. What does that mean? Like what have I referred to over there? So in terms of the photo itself, I referred to a Katora mindset, which refers to a narrative within the status quo, that is that when adults or parents simply cannot afford school or simply cannot afford survival, they force their kids as a means to an end and they force them to beg. And essentially it's a reference to the metal bowl that parents give to their child to go beg on the streets, and they use that bowl to collect money. And that is what in Urdu we call the Katora. So I have emphasized that through a subtitles, colorful hands forced to beg, which means hands that were meant to hold color pencils and bring color into their life are now meant to hold a metal bowl that kind of restricts and limits their future. So that is the reference behind that image and content of the first. While I wanted to maintain that on the first feature page, I wanted to also shed light on what a Katora is, because that is something that not a lot of people would know. So I have taken a picture of a Katora, essentially a metal bowl, and I've emphasized it. I've edited it in a way to make it look something that is very impactful, and that it does look like a very dramatic image, because that is the kind of impact I want. So essentially that's the first feature article where we're talking about that narrative, we're talking about the problem, and that is something and I wanted the audiences to be hit with head on. So as soon as we start with the problem, I wanted the audiences to know the severity of the problem. As you dive deeper into the second feature article and the third feature article, it talks more about the problem, but also talks about the solutions. So the possible solutions of us collaborating with like third-party NGOs, government initiative, all of those solutions are things that I wanted to incorporate within the magazine. I've taken photos of the children as well because I wanted people and the readers to know and these are the kind of people that we're talking about. These are the victims of these stories that we need to emphasize. And essentially for our target audience, when you realize that the victims are literally kids, you're much more able to empathize with them as a reader or as an audience. So at the latter half of this magazine, we explore different sort of solutions that we can take. I've taken photos of the possible solutions. And essentially I wanted to, at the end of the magazine, give a very conclusive conclusion on what we can do and have a call to action. In reference to the castings and the locations of the schools, so essentially the cast is actual real kids within these schools, within schools that are a beneficiary or a patron of community service. Underprivileged schools, essentially, we've taken these because we know that these kids are likely to be the kids that may have to drop out due to poverty. So I've taken a kid and I've taken that as my subject for the cover page, and also taken more kids who are the victims of poverty and who are the victims of illiteracy.